Greetings, folks. Zazibar here, and today I'm here to review a comic book with the following question on the back cover. What would the Gotham City of 100 years ago have been like? That question is the crux of a lot of these so-called ELSEWORLD stories. And what an ELSEWORLD story is it's just as the title implies, it's a world that's not the main continuity. It's a world that's somewhere else. And DC usually does it as this is a totally different universe than the current continuity. Like, this is another of the 52 Earths that this story takes place on. Other ones in this line that you might be familiar with would be Superman at Earth's End, which is terrible. I'm not terribly familiar with them myself, so I can't really name a whole bunch of them. The Dark Knight Returns is kind of an ELSEWORLD story, but I don't think it's got that in its name. There are others, but The Dark Knight Returns is kind of an ELSEWORLD story, but again, it doesn't call itself that, I don't think. But DC has a whole line of these, and today we're going to be looking at, if you haven't guessed already, we're going to be taking a look at the one called A Tale of the Batman, Gotham by Gaslight. That is a really cool-ass freaking title for a book. That grabbed my attention immediately. It set this image in my mind of a really creepy, gothic-looking Gotham City. And I didn't immediately know what it was going to be about, but the title gave me some ideas that this is going to be Gotham back in time. Like, what if Batman existed in a certain time period? And, of course, the book is about Batman in the Victorian era. Now, it doesn't mean that Batman goes back to the Victorian era, as in the modern Batman going back in time. No, this is, what if Bruce Wayne actually became Batman living in the Victorian era? And it's a very interesting concept. Because this was the time when this is the century when Dracula was created. And Batman's always been, his image has always been associated with Dracula. And this particular Batman image looks like Dracula. And what I mean is, I'm probably showing the cover right now up on the screen. If you look at the Batman design, he's got a raised kind of collar, and that wouldn't make it a cape as much as it is a cloak. Now, a cloak is worn by characters like Zorro, Dracula, and a whole bunch of other heroes and fictional characters, and it only sets the mood even more. And I almost feel like the main artist on this, Mike Mignola, who's the creator of Hellboy, actually designed that high collar look to evoke an image of Zorro, who is the inspiration in regular continuity for Batman. Of course, Batman wouldn't have been inspired by Zorro in this continuity because he becomes Batman before Zorro was created. So, still, it's an interesting visual aesthetic. Now let's get to the story itself. I've got an immediate kind of gripe with this. As you guys, if you follow my channel, you'll know that I did a review back in October for Batman Year One, the movie, and in that I explained that I'm not a huge fan of Frank Miller's actual graphic novel, Batman Year One. I mean, I like it, but it's not. Yeah, I don't love it. And this came out in 1989. This is like, I believe 2 years, maybe, no, it's probably more than that. This is only a couple years after Frank Miller wrote Year One, and it's very clear from the opening pages that this is inspired by Year One. Batman's narration boxes are ripped pieces of paper like they are in Year One. Gotham is described in this very film noir kind of way, even though this is, you know, the Victorian era, but mystery and horror novels back then wrote cities like this, so that's clearly what it's supposed to be. And it just, overall, it's a very Year One kind of thing. And also, on top of that, Batman's origin is done in this book. It's different, of course. And it's not just that he's in the Victorian era that makes it different. What also makes it different is that he had the idea to become Batman before he got all his training, and I really like that. It's a really, really tight story, and that's good because this isn't that long, and since it's an ELSEWORLD story, it's not going to continue past however many issues it is in the miniseries, or if it's just a one-shot. So that way it can tell a very tight story and not leave things open-ended, or not tell an overarching story and just have a bunch of stuff on screen exploring this, or on screen, sorry, have a bunch of stuff in the book that doesn't really wrap together, and is just kind of there to explore what Batman will be like in this time period, and that's not what happens at all. There is a tight, engaging story here, and not only is it that, but it's fascinating, and plays off the idea of this is Batman in the Victorian era. But I'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk about the origin first. Just like in year one, he leaves Gotham City to travel the world and train to become Batman. He trained under the greatest detectives, the greatest fighters, all that. The book talks about him going to Europe. And it opens practically the same way year one does, just with a Victorian era twist. In the opening of year one, Bruce Wayne is flying back to Gotham on a plane. It's the 80s, of course. In this, he's coming back on a boat. I instantly was worried that this was just going to be Batman Year 1 in the Victorian era. That's not what I came here to read. Thankfully, that's not what it is at all. The origin is done here because Bruce's origin, mainly his parents getting murdered, is tied directly into the entire story. I'm gonna spoil it, only because I want to talk about this thing full circle. So, if you don't want any spoilers, turn it off, turn this review off now, go read it, and then come back. Or, if you don't really care about spoilers, then keep listening. So, this book is about Bruce Wayne in Gotham becoming Batman, and his first major case being tracking down Jack the Ripper. Yeah, the Jack the Ripper, who's come to Gotham City to escape all the buzz around all his murders that he did in England. So, just to kind of go to Gotham and lie low. Of course, he doesn't lie low for long. He practically, almost instantly after coming to Gotham, he starts killing women again. And he has his own narration boxes, and they're really fascinating since you can tell he's nuts, and that's awesome. But he's also got this kind of like sophisticated wit in his insanity, so it's really interesting to read. It's kind of like imagine if the Joker was even more non-secular in the way he spoke. That's kind of how it is. And that's really interesting to read. Oh, and mentioning our jolly old criminal, the Joker is referenced in this. Batman doesn't fight him, but there's a wanted poster up in Inspector Gordon, I really like that, Inspector Gordon's office, that he drank some kind of poison and it put a permanent grin on his face, and he kills people by putting the poison in them. It's a brief moment, but it's cool. I'm getting way off track. Anyway, so what makes this story so tight is that Bruce Wayne's first case as Batman, that takes him a while to solve, almost the entire first couple months of him being Batman, therefore kind of putting it under the moniker of what was year one, is Jack the Ripper, but it also ties into his origin, in that Bruce Wayne's family friend, this guy he calls Uncle Jake, hired an assassin to kill his parents back in early 1800s when Bruce Wayne was a boy. And on the night that this guy killed Bruce Wayne's parents, they were on a carriage ride back to Wayne Manor. Love that. That's also very cool. It's very cool imagery. While the murder is going on, bats start flying overhead. Bruce Wayne looks up from his parents being shot and looks up at the bats, and that's the inspiration for him becoming Batman. And he makes the costume before he leaves on his little globe-trotting adventure to train to become this creature of the night to fight crime. But what ties it all together and makes this a really well-written story is that Uncle Jake turns out to be Jack the Ripper. Yes. And what makes it even tighter is that the reason why he's killing women and doing the same crimes that the real Jack the Ripper did was because he loved Martha Wayne, but she was already in love with Thomas Wayne. And when Jake tried to express his love to Martha, she laughed at him. And throughout the entire story, before we learn that Uncle Jake is Jack the Ripper, he's talking about he kills women because in his mind he's hearing them laughing at him. That's so cool and so well constructed. It's just so well constructed, and it makes it a very satisfying read. This is both a good mystery story and a good exploration, this is my main criticism of it, so I guess let's get into this now. A satisfactory exploration, excuse me, of what Batman would be like in the Victorian era. But overall, that mystery story is really well written, and just a really good Batman story, regardless of time period. It's a really good Batman detective story. Right up there with Long Halloween. I would put it like only a couple leagues under the stuff in Long Halloween. It's a really engaging mystery. But then we come to the main criticism. One, this is not nearly long enough. The thing about mystery stories, or at least the mystery stories that I like, is that I like there to be a big, slowly paced build-up to learning who the killer is, or who the criminal is. It makes the payoff even more satisfying for all these red herrings to be tossed out. One issue I have with this particular mystery story is that we get this really cliched kind of kind of a Batman story trope of Bruce Wayne being accused of being the killer, for irony, dramatic irony. In year one, it was Commissioner Gordon, or he was Lieutenant Gordon in that, thinking Bruce Wayne was Batman, so he wanted him arrested. He didn't actually arrest him in that story, but he was accused of being who was technically the main criminal in that book, Batman. In Long Halloween, Bruce was accused of being the holiday killer. And he was almost arrested for that. In this, he's accused of being Jack the Ripper. It gets, I don't want to say it gets old, but I don't know. It's a Batman trope, and again, it comes from this being inspired by year one. But anyway, it's a small gripe. It's not really a problem as much as it is just an observation. So make of that what you will. But it's kind of a problem if you know you're Batman. Anyway, moving on. Here we come to the main criticism. The reason why this isn't long enough is, as I said, because there's not enough in between we learn what the mystery is and learning what who the killer is. There's not enough suspense. We know Bruce Wayne's not the killer. I would have liked it if there were more red herrings thrown out there. Like, I don't know, Alfred's the killer. The mayor's the killer. I don't know, something like that. Make it longer. I know why this isn't that long. Again, it's an ELSEWORLD story. It's got to be quick. And I like that at least the writer, who is Brian Augustine, at least knew that it was more important to tell a cohesive story than to just have a bunch of stuff happen that doesn't tie together. That makes for a very unsatisfactory read. But it leads to kind of a unsuspenseful mystery story. Since we learn who the killer is nearly as quickly as we learn what the mystery itself is. So, it's a little weird to read a mystery story like that. But the other big problem with this is this being a Batman story. Bruce Wayne has a lot more panel time than his alter ego. Now, that's not a huge problem, since I love the way Augustine writes Bruce Wayne. So, it's not a huge problem, because I like the way it's written, and it's good dialogue, and it's fun to read. But the thing that it doesn't explore what would be different about the way Batman fights crime in this setting. We get a look at his utility belt a couple of times, but we don't get a long look at it to see why this is a different, or how Batman operates differently. We see that he's got wooden stakes, and gas and like powder that like it's pretty much what a gas pellet is in normal Batman continuity. No batarangs, which is okay because makes sense. This is the Victorian era, but again, we get looks at this briefly, and Batman himself has very little panel time, and that's disappointing because this is one of those stories where we want to see how Batman operates differently. I don't feel like there's enough of Batman himself doing the investigating. We get a lot of Bruce Wayne doing the investigating, which I guess makes sense since this is a guy he knows who's the killer. But I don't know. I would have liked to see how Batman does detective work differently in this this setting. It's a little disappointing to not get enough exploration of how Batman's different. Now, look, I know that sounds kind of contradictory because what I was saying before that a lot of these Elseworld stories are bad because they don't tell a cohesive story and focus on how this character's different. But if you don't do that at all, or you don't do enough of it, again, it makes for kind of an unsatisfactory read. And this could all be solved, I think, if the book was longer. Just like another another couple of, just like another, 10 pages longer. Or maybe a full issue longer. This could have worked really well. And it kind of makes me angry that there's two stories in here. There's Gotham by Gaslight, and then there's another one called Masters of the Future. I'm not going to talk too much about Masters of the Future since Gotham by Gaslight is the main thing I wanted to review, and that's really all I wanted to talk about. But I'll touch on that briefly in a minute. There's a couple more things I still have to say about Gotham by Gaslight. The art's beautiful. It's very atmospheric, which is good for this kind of what this book is trying to do by setting in the Victorian era. It's a very creepy, superstitious era, and that's really cool. And I also really like that Batman's accused of being a vampire. Again, I wish he did more detective stuff, though. Anyway, but I love the way Mignola draws this Batman. He looks really vampiric, and that's awesome. Again, I like the high collar thing I was talking about before, the raised collar. I love the utility belt. My only problem is the mask. I get what he's going for. It looks more stitched together and older than what your consummate Batman mask looks like. But Mignola switches between the blank contact eyes that Batman usually has, and then also the the cutout holes for the eyes, which the live action film Batmans have, and he switches between them. Generally, in close-ups, it's the cutout holes where you just see his Bruce Wayne's eyes. And then, but in like far out shots, it's the blank white eyes. I prefer the blank white eyes. I don't know. That's just the way it's drawn in the comics. I like that image better. It always looked cool in the animated series. It just looks cooler. But again, I get why it's like that for the whole Victorian thing. But at least stay consistent with it. The mask itself, though, it's basically a blue Batman costume, which is fine because that's the way it was in this time in regular continuity, and that's just how Batman was perceived, as having blue cape, blue mask, blue gloves, blue boots, and a gray suit. So that's fine. But the mask has like these weird, like almost artsy looking design like things on it, like almost like the way tapestries look, like the designs on tapestries on the mask. Why? Why is that there? It looks weird. And I don't know. It just takes away from the fact that he's supposed to look scary. I don't know. It's weird looking for sure. Otherwise, though, the costume looks really cool, and I like how it looks a lot like Zorro. That's ironic in a good way. I'll touch briefly on Masters of the Future. It's an okay story. I I like how they're trying to it's a different writing or drawing team for Masters of the Future. I like how they're trying to give Batman more dialogue. That's cool, but it's bad dialogue. This guy does not know how to write Batman. He knows how to write Bruce Wayne, but he doesn't know how to write Batman. He writes Batman and Bruce Wayne the same, and that's a problem. He writes Batman as this sophisticated Englishman-sounding guy, and I don't think, even if this is the Victorian era, that's not how Bruce Wayne would want Batman to sound. A Victorian era Batman, I wouldn't expect to talk very much. And when I was talking before about how in Gotham by Gaslight, we don't get enough of panel time, that doesn't necessarily mean if we get more panel time, he has to have more dialogue. No, he doesn't have to have any dialogue for all I care. It's Batman. A lot of the coolness of Batman comes from the way he looks and the things he does. So we don't need to have him talk that much. I mean, if you have him talk a lot, that's fine, but you have to know how to write Batman, and this guy clearly doesn't. I think the writer for the second book is P. Craig Russell. He writes him as overly sophisticated, and that's weird. And he writes Bruce Wayne the same way. So, I mean, it's not like that's a problem for the whole secret identity thing. It's a problem in that Bruce himself tries to separate Bruce Wayne from Batman. So it's just a problem with the overall image of the character. This review is getting way too long. Alright, so let's wrap this up. The last thing I want to say about Masters of the Future is that the art is okay. It's not done by Mike Mignola. It's done by Eduardo Barreto. It's a little bit too, I don't know. It's not nearly dark enough. Everything's way too bright. Almost all the action happens during the day. And I don't know, overall it just looks more generic and not nearly as atmospheric and cool looking as the first story. The story, I haven't really talked about the story much for Masters of the Universe, so Masters of the Future, not Masters of the Universe, excuse me. Masters of the Future. It's just, you know, a guy wants to destroy Gotham City. That's pretty much it. The villain's okay. He's a little generic. He's your typical mustache twirling, I want to destroy the city because I can kind of thing. But it's okay. It's interesting to say the least. But nothing too special. Gotham by Gaslight's a much tighter story. And the problem with Masters of the Future is that they introduce a love interest for Bruce Wayne. And again, it's not nearly as much of a tight story as Gotham by Gaslight had, and it's running into the problem of we're not going to get any more of this. So, you know. I wish Masters of the Future had been ditched and just had Gotham by Gaslight longer. We could have had that suspense I talked about earlier. But, anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I'm going to rate, since I'm reading this in trade, I'm going to rate it as an overall kind of book. So, I'm going to give Gotham by Gaslight, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. It's a really good story, but it's got a lot of problems that just result from this being too short and this being an ELSEWORLD story. These things need to be longer, but they need to stay in the direction that this set. That we need to tell a good story before we start exploring why the character is different in this setting. But then we also need to have that exploring of why the character is different in this setting. You need both. Otherwise, it's just, again, it can result in an unsatisfactory read. The arc's beautiful again, by Mike Mignola. The second story's okay, but the first story is beautiful art. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll see you guys all soon.